Number 1.
Known as the Lovers Lane murders, the brutal killing of 22-year-old Cheryl Henry and 21-year-old Andy Atkinson in August 1990 shocked the Houston, Texas area and is considered one of Houston's most brutal slayings. Their murders remain unsolved today. On August 22, 1990, Cheryl Henry went on a double date with her sister, Shane, to Bayou Mama's Club in Houston, Texas. The couples parted ways around 11 p.m. Cheryl and her date, Andy Atkinson, headed up to Lovers Lane in West Houston, a common spot for young couples who wanted privacy. The area at the time was undeveloped and became the future site of an industrial park. When Cheryl did not show up for work the next day and her family failed to hear from her, they reported her missing. On August 23, 1990, a Houston patrol officer found Andy's white Honda Civic in an isolated cul-de-sac off Enclave Parkway near where Cisco Corporation sits today, but neither Cheryl or Andy were in the vehicle. Traces of fresh blood were found inside the car. The officer ran the plates and discovered the car belonged to a missing person. Police brought in a tracking dog to search the area for any sign of Cheryl and Andy. Clues found in the car: keys in ignition, front car seats reclined, a cassette tape in the deck of the car stereo, led police to believe that Cheryl and Andy went to Lovers Lane to make out but were interrupted. A golf club and 3 golf balls were found pointing in the direction of Cheryl's body, about 200 yards away from her car. Cheryl was lying face down with her hands tied behind her back with hemp rope. Her clothes had been cut from her body, and her underwear was bunched up inside a pocket of her jeans. The killer attempted to hide the body with boards from a rotting cedar fence. The killer also raped Cheryl before slashing her throat, which bore 3 ragged slash marks. A $20 bill lay near her body. The next day, Andy's body was found tied to a tree. He was sitting up with his back to the tree. His throat had been cut so severely he was nearly decapitated. Money found on Andy led detectives to believe the motive was not robbery, but sexual assault and murder. DNA taken from the crime scene was tested against the DNA of several suspects, however, none matched. But then, 2 months before the Lovers Lane murders, an unknown attacker raped a 30-year-old exotic dancer at 7826 Terracotta in Houston. Her attacker also robbed her. He was waiting for the victim in her home when she returned and asked, "Where's Randy?" Randy was her husband-boyfriend. Years later in 2008, police tested DNA from that case against the DNA found on Cheryl, and it was a match. The rape victim was able to help authorities construct a composite sketch of her attacker. She also told authorities her attacker was wearing what could have been a security guard uniform at the time of the assault. The victim worked at a topless bar called Gigi's in 1990. Cheryl worked at a similar club called Rick's Cabaret, and Andy occasionally worked the door at another club, Dreams Street, which was managed by his father. He also worked at Gold's Gym. Authorities believe the suspect frequented or worked at local strip clubs, and that is how he met the women. In March 2001, authorities received an anonymous note that may have come from the killer. However, it turned out to be another dead end. This year August marks the 27th anniversary of the murders, and the rapist-killer has never been caught. Cheryl and Andy knew each other for only 2 weeks before they were murdered. Cheryl attended Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches. Andy had just graduated college in North Carolina before moving closer to his father's family in Houston. While DNA from the rape victim was linked to Cheryl's killer, it's almost useless when they cannot identify who the DNA belongs to. So, does this mean the killer has never been arrested for any crimes since 1990? And did the rapist-killer ever rape or kill before or after these crimes, but was never caught? There were traces of fresh blood found in the car, but it is unclear whose blood it was or exactly where in the car it was found. However, this does seem to show that the killer approached the car, somehow hurt Cheryl or Andy, and then forced them out of the car. Did Cheryl and Andy know their killer? Did he follow them after leaving Bayou Mama's? Or was he lying in wait at Lovers Lane hoping any couple would show up? We know the police believe the killer may have frequented or worked at nightclubs, so I think it's possible they did know their killer. Maybe he worked at Dreams Street or Rick's Cabaret, or was a regular customer. I also think it's possible the killer did not intend to actually murder either victim, but things got out of control. Maybe Cheryl fought hard for her life. It would help explain why he didn't kill Andy first. I mean, if it was all about Cheryl, he could have killed Andy first to get him out of the way. Or the killer took great pleasure in having Andy watch. It appeared there was more rage aimed at Andy because he was nearly decapitated. This could be because of the killer's jealousy towards Andy dating Cheryl. Why did the killer leave clues to Cheryl's body but not Andy's? He wanted her found, I get that, but there were no clues leading to Andy's body, and he wasn't found until the day after Cheryl's body was found. So why was it important to the killer that Cheryl was found first? Or did it even matter? He definitely knew the rape victim because he asked where her husband-boyfriend was and said his name, plus he was waiting for her in her home. It's strange that she did not recognize him. Although he was wearing a fishnet stocking over his face, she could make out his features. She must not have recognized his voice either. Apparently, he was quite the chit-chatterer, saying vulgar things to her during the rape. I guess it's possible he could have found out about the husband through other means. What about the murder weapon? As far as I can tell, police never found it, but I know police or a medical examiner could have figured out the type of knife used in the killings. I couldn't find anything on that either. Was the same knife used on both victims? At one time, police believed there was more than one killer involved, because how does one person subdue two people and kill each of them a few yards away from the other? Only DNA from one person was found in Cheryl, so I think it's more likely that there was only one person. The attack in Terracotta involved only one man, Cheryl and Andy's killer. 2 years after the Lovers Lane murders, on August 4, 1992, 23-year-old Tara Suzette Breckenridge disappeared around 1 a.m. after leaving the men's club in Houston, where she worked as a waitress. The men's club, if it is still in the same location, was only a short distance from Bayou Mama's. What piqued my interest here is that she was last seen talking with the security guard at the club. The guy in the rape case had on a uniform cops believe was that of a security guard. Tara has never been found, nor has there ever been an arrest for her abduction and likely murder. Other young women disappeared from Harris County in the early 90s never to be found. Many of them were in their early 20s with blonde or brown hair, about the same height and weight, and vanished in the early hours of the morning. I realize the Houston area is large, and these could be unrelated, but at the same time, it's possible some of them are related.
Number 2.
A man has been extradited from Mexico to face murder charges in Utah, and authorities say he killed 2 women exactly 2 years apart more than a decade ago. Juan Arreola Murillo, 41, was charged with aggravated murder, aggravated robbery and aggravated burglary, according to CBS affiliate KUTV. Recently unsealed documents identified Arreola Murillo as the murder suspect dubbed the February 9 killer. Sonia Mejia, 29, and Damiana Castillo, 57, were murdered at their Salt Lake County homes in February 2006 and February 2008, respectively. According to the Utah Department of Public Safety, Sonia Mejia lived in Taylorsville, Utah, just south of Salt Lake City, with her common-law husband and 8-year-old son at the time of her murder. On the morning of her death, Mejia was home alone when witnesses say they saw her talking to an unknown Hispanic male at her front door. One witness saw the man assault Mejia before forcefully entering her residence and shutting the door behind him. Mejia's husband found her body after he returned from work that evening. Mejia was sexually assaulted and strangled to death, according to the Department of Public Safety. She was 6 months pregnant at the time of her death. Her attacker also stole her Ford Escort, which was found in a parking lot 4 days later, and the jewelry she'd been wearing. 2 years later, Damiana Castillo was found murdered at her West Valley City apartment. She had reportedly left work on Saturday, February 9, 2008 at 7:30 p.m. according to Salt Lake City news outlet KSL. Her son found her body the next morning around 10 a.m., he told Salt Lake ABC affiliate KTVX, on the ground covered by a pillow. She was a very prompt lady, West Valley City Police Captain Tom McLachlan told KSL at the time. She was never late for work, always attended church, and no one had seen her that morning. Castillo had been strangled her to death, according to KUTV, and the recent arrest report cited by the outlet noted there was an overturned table and a disturbed jewelry box in her home, while the contents of her purse and wallet on the couch. Mejia and Castillo lived 1 mile from one another, according to Salt Lake City's Fox 13. Though her body was discovered on February 10, which is her date of death given on her cold case file by the Utah Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the Unified Police Department of Greater Salt Lake's list of cold cases says that her homicide that occurred exactly 2 years after Mija's DNA helped authorities link the two women's murders to a single killer. In 2010, the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office filed charges against John Doe after a DNA profile was created. Another break came in 2016 when fingerprint analysis technicians linked Areola Murillo to the murders after police examined prints found on a bag of Cheetos and Coke can at Mejia's crime scene. Areola Murillo had been arrested in Salt Lake City in July 2008 for fraud, according to court records cited by KUTV. The address provided to authorities after his 2008 arrest matched the apartment complex where Mejia was killed in 2006, though it wasn't clear if he lived there at the time of her death. He was deported from the United States later in 2008 after pleading guilty to those charges. Salt Lake County District Attorney Sim Gill claimed they'd known of Areola Murillo's identity since the 2016 break in the case, but had to sit on it due to the delicate nature of extradition. Once somebody is a foreign national who leaves, we do have certain diplomatic responsibilities, said Gill, according to Fox 13. In Mexico, we must assure we will not seek the death penalty. With the death penalty off the table, Areola Murillo faces life in prison if convicted of the murders. Whenever you have an unsolved homicide, you leave this wound, you leave this lack of justice, said Gill, according to KUTV. It is about bringing some measure of justice to the victims and some measure of justice to our community as a whole.
Number 3.
Bill Thomas shudders at the thought to this day. The tone of his parents' voice signaling something was wrong. The realization that his sister, Kathleen Thomas, was murdered on a scenic Virginia roadway. The understanding, years later, that his parents had to make 3 separate phone calls to him and his 2 brothers, one in New York at the time, took an entire day to reach. Kathleen Thomas was just starting a new chapter after leaving the U.S. Navy when her life was cut short. If she had not been killed, Bill Thomas is sure she would have gone on to accomplish anything she wanted. This year, she would have been 62. In the 35 years since she passed, when I see all these amazing women running for president and vice president, Congress, senators, ambassadors, CEOs, Kathy Thomas would have been one of those amazing women, her brother said. This month marks the 35th anniversary of Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski's murder, the first homicides in what would later be called the Colonial Parkway murders, which resulted in the deaths of 3 couples and the disappearance of another. For the families of the 8 victims, it is yet another year spent searching for answers. Despite the fact that there have been no public updates on the case for nearly 11 years, some of the families have found renewed hope through genetic genealogy and a resurgence in public awareness. This murder series is the single greatest unsolved murder series in the history of Virginia, and it needs attention, Thomas said. We don't need the reminder that these are cold cases. Between 1986 and 1989, 3 young couples were found brutally murdered, while 1 couple is still missing and presumed dead, on or near the Colonial Parkway, a roadway that connects Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown, the nation's historic triangle. Though 2 slayings took place on the actual parkway and 2 were in nearby areas, all 4 are tied together by the name, the Colonial Parkway murders. In the late 1980s, the murders spanning 3 years brought 8 families together through the shared grief, frustration and denial that only they could understand. Throughout the years, it was usually the victims' parents who spearheaded efforts to find justice, renew interest and pressure law enforcement to pursue their cases. After nearly 3 decades, the parents who are alive, many in declining health, are still without answers. For the other half, the parents who have died, they will never see justice for their children's deaths. Now, it is up to the victims' siblings to carry the torch. On any given day, Thomas can be found behind his desk in his Connecticut home sifting through archives, reaching out to law enforcement and answering calls and emails about his sister's case. He's made it a point to make himself available to the public in case the right tip comes in. Every couple weeks, he hears from someone new. If he receives what he believes to be a credible tip, he will then turn it over to the FBI. Within the last 5 years, he has turned over dozens of tips. He also helps manage a Facebook page, Colonial Parkway Murders, with 14,000 followers, which aims to build awareness of the 4 cases. His newest endeavor is a podcast which he co-hosts with Kristen Dilley called Mind Over Murder. The podcast has extensively covered the Colonial Parkway cases, in addition to exploring other trends in crime, such as DNA advancement. It's very important to do these interviews and to let your readers and the viewers of the television series, even listening to the podcast and whatever, know why this is still important, Thomas said. Joyce Call Canada, Richard Call's sister, hyphenates her last name so that people recognize it, while one of her brothers still keeps their family's home phone number. She's remained in Gloucester most of her life, just in case. Her brother, better known to his friends and family as Keith, had aspirations of becoming a computer programmer and spent his free time toying with his new at-home computer. This year, he would have been 53. For the past 15 years, Jeanette Santiago, sister of Robin Edwards, has been the main point of contact for her family. Her son was only a year old when Robin died. Now he has 3 children of his own. Over the years, things have changed. My dad died, and my mom mentally can't handle the stress of dealing with the case, said Santiago. She described Robin as a firecracker personality who got along with everyone she met. She was fascinated by the circus and had dreams of running off with Ringling Brothers. This year she would have turned 48. Paula and Terry Hiley, Cassandra Hiley's sisters, have written letters over the years to the FBI pleading for answers. They plan to write another soon. Cassandra Hiley, who was a talented gymnast and spent her time helping others in the sport, would have been 51 this year. I'm proud to know them. I'm sorry we met as a part of this club that no one wants to be invited to join, but they are wonderful, thoughtful people on their own and have done great things to keep their family members' memories alive, Thomas said. Despite the moniker the Colonial Parkway Murders, the time frame and proximity of the deaths, law enforcement has never conclusively linked the cases, leaving many, including the family members, to believe that some or all of the cases are connected or none at all. Regardless, some of the remaining family members have formed a united front, choosing to work alongside each other to find answers, keeping in contact with each other on a regular basis. Tying them all together helps in a way because, if they put a title to it, and people want to put together a show, Paula Hiley said, then people are more likely to care, finished Terry Hiley. Call Canada was at work in 2009 when she got a call from her brother. A man named Bill Thomas had reached out on their new Facebook page. What happened to Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Hiley? My name is Bill Thomas. I'm the older brother of Kathy Thomas, who together with her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski were the first 2 victims in the so-called Colonial Parkway murders, he wrote. This was the first time Thomas had spoken to any of the other victims' family members since his sister's death 20 years prior, but it would not be the last. Thomas, who was in Los Angeles at the time, had seen a story on WTKR detailing how sensitive photos in the Colonial Parkway murders were leaked to the public. After speaking for hours with Call Canada about their family members' cases, the pair began planning their efforts to pressure law enforcement. We had a good and long conversation about everything and started asking, what do we do, and how do we get the word out? Call Canada said. Then, the little ideas turned into big ideas, and that was the start of our connection. Soon, other victims' family members followed, with Thomas leading the charge, providing interviews to the media and speaking out about their frustration with the lack of progress on the case. In 2010, the FBI arranged the first, and, to date, only in-person meeting with all the families to discuss the status of the cases and field questions. Now, more than 10 years later, the families are pushing for another meeting. This time, their goal is to have DNA in the cases tested. According to Thomas, 3 out of the 4 cases have DNA evidence. Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Affairs Specialist Christina Pullen would not confirm the presence of DNA, whether it has been tested, or any specifics on the ongoing case. Virginia State Police, who are handling the Nobling, Ann Edwards and Phelps and Lauer cases, declined to comment if they had DNA in either of the cases. This is an ongoing criminal investigation. We are not in a position to discuss what evidence we are working with as part of the case, said Corinne Geller, Public Relations Director for VSP. In 2018, when the news broke that the 45-year-old Golden State Killer cold case had been solved with the arrest of Joseph DeAngelo, many, including Thomas and other families of the Colonial Parkway murder victims, found a renewed sense of hope with investigative genetic genealogy. According to Parabone Nanolabs genetic genealogist Cease Moore, genetic genealogy involves linking DNA of unidentified bodies and potential suspects to relatives who have uploaded their DNA to genealogy sites that allow police to access their genetic information. We're reverse engineering the family tree of this unknown person and eventually their identity through the family tree with who they share DNA with, one or two genealogy databases that we have access to, said Moore. The analyzed DNA can then pinpoint the exact relation between those tested, allowing law enforcement agencies to narrow down their suspect pool and make an arrest. In the case of the Golden State Killer, DeAngelo was identified through third cousins. According to Moore, this new advancement has led to hundreds of arrests across the country. Within the past 3.5 years, genetic genealogy has been responsible for solving approximately 350 cases. For the families linked by the Colonial Parkway murders, it means that DNA discovered at the crime scenes could, one day, solve the cases. Thomas said he had been notified by the FBI a year ago that DNA in his sister's case was being sent for testing at Quantico. To his knowledge, the DNA still has not been tested. The FBI declined to comment on the status of DNA testing because the investigation is ongoing. We understand that we're not going to be at the front of the line, but to hear that evidence hasn't been tested in over a year is unacceptable, Thomas said. Why not just tell us that our case will never be a priority? No one has been standing in this line longer than the family members. Santiago said she had previously been told by Virginia State Police that there was DNA evidence in her sister's case and the possibility of conducting more advanced testing on it, but has not heard anything since, as communication has varied over time as the case is handed down to new people. According to Moore, there may be reasons why the DNA has not been tested yet, such as the sample size of the DNA could be too small or too severely degraded to undergo genetic genealogy analysis. As this field continues to advance, Moore said agencies could be waiting to test for better results. There's always hope that you might find more DNA, finding smaller amounts, with more advanced techniques of detecting DNA, said Moore. So as long as there's something left to analyze, there's always hope that it will be solved through genetic genealogy. While genetic genealogy offers the family members a new prospect, they have never given up hope that their siblings' cases will be solved. For Call Canada, it is the thing that keeps her going, hope that her brother's remains will be discovered and laid to rest. For Terry and Paula Hiley, it is the hope that they and their parents will see justice. For Thomas, who has dedicated years of his life searching for answers, it is the hope that after 3 decades, his sister's cold case will be finally closed. The burden gets a little easier, but in such a small incremental way that you don't realize it at first, Thomas said. But you're always reminded, in little ways, who is here and who is not.
Number 4.
It was a lovely summer's day in Tacoma, Washington, when Ruth Cooper, 42, and her boyfriend, Stephen Harkins, 27, decided to make the 10-mile trip to Tula Lake in Pierce County. They planned a weekend of camping during their summer break from the vocational school where they worked. It was August 10, 1985, Tears for Fears was on the radio, Back to the Future was in cinemas, and everyone was talking about the crimes of the Night Stalker down in California. Still, nothing like that ever happened in Tacoma. Until it did, and bodies of couples started to pile up in the Pacific Northwest. Was it a case of a lover's spat? The work of a serial killer? The work of multiple killers and the timing and victim profiles merely a coincidence? 4 couples ended up dead over several years, while 2 men are in jails for some of the crimes. The rest remain unsolved. When Cooper and Harkins didn't return to work on Monday morning, both families reported them missing. It would be 4 days later that hikers in Pierce County discovered the body of Harkins inside a sleeping bag at a campsite. He'd been shot in the head as he slept. Not far away, the hikers soon found the body of the couple's dog, also shot. Police soon descended on the area to investigate the homicide and begin a widespread search for Cooper, who they believed was likely a second victim as opposed to being a killer. With Harkins seemingly executed in his sleep, it seemed like the couple may have been surprised, with Cooper possibly abducted. Ironically, surprising couples in the dead of night and executing the man with a handgun before sexually assaulting the female would be one of the critical aspects of notorious serial killer Richard Ramirez's modus operandi, his killings featuring heavily across cable news channels. There was, of course, no connection between the cases. 2 months later, on October 26, a skull was found near Hearts Lake, a mile and a half away. Dental records showed that it belonged to Cooper, and further searches revealed the rest of the body 2 days later, near skeletonized and missing her clothing. She was shot in the stomach, and a tube sock was tied around her throat. Police believed that the sock, commonly used in athletics and sports, had been used as a restraining method rather than a weapon. Detective Norm Weimer said police knew a lot about what happened but had no suspects in the case, with some wondering if a double killing the previous year may have been linked. Edward Smith and Kimberly Diane Levine, a couple from Kent in the Seattle-Tacoma metropolitan area, had also been abducted and murdered. Smith and Lavin met while attending the University of Southeastern Massachusetts at Dartmouth and were deeply in love. After graduation in 1984, the couple moved to Kent, Washington, and worked as government accountants. Everything seemed to be going well for them as they began their journey in life, and the two were soon engaged to be married. That day never came. On March 9, 1985, the couple made the fateful decision to have a weekend getaway in Grant County off the I-90. They wanted to explore some of the landmarks and scenery in the area. What horror transpired that night wouldn't be known for some years, but it certainly ended in murder as the following day, Smith's body was found in a gravel pit close to the Wanapum Dam. His hands were tied behind his back and his throat slit. Missing his wallet and ID, it wouldn't be until later that police managed to identify Edward, and his employer raised the alarm that he was missing. A major search was launched to find Levine, and 2 weeks afterward, the couple's vehicle was found abandoned 10 miles away from where Smith's body was discovered. A fingerprint was recovered, but still no sign of the missing woman. It took until August before Levine was found, the same month that Cooper and Harkins were killed. Levine's body was found in sagebrush 2 miles from her fiancé and skeletonized through exposure and predation. While still actively investigating the murders, the case took an alarming turn on December 12, 1985, when 36-year-old roofer Mike Reamer and his girlfriend, Diana Robertson, 21, traveled to Pierce County from their Tacoma home. Like the first couple, Reamer and Robertson also planned a camping trip and intended to both check trap lines set by Reamer and search for a Christmas tree. The two also brought along their 2-year-old daughter, Crystal Louise Robertson, and it would be her who first raised alarms that something was very wrong after she was found alone at a Kmart 30 miles away in Spanaway the same night. Identified through local news, when the young girl was asked by her grandmother where her mom was, she said, "Mommy was in the trees." Police immediately began searching for Reamer and Robertson, hoping the couple's distinctive red Plymouth pickup truck would be easy to spot from the air, but searches found little success. It wouldn't be until the cold February of 1986 that Diana Robertson's body was found by a man who had gotten out of his car to walk his dog. Located alongside the couple's truck, the body was just off a logging road not far from Mineral and partially buried in the 6 inches of snow blanketing the area. The weather initially hampered investigations, yet bloodstains were found inside the pickup truck, and police also found a note inside the vehicle that stated simply, "I love you, Diana." Written on a manila envelope, it seems possible that something had been contained inside, perhaps a paper gift or message of some kind. Diana's mother, Louise Conrad, would later say she was sure the handwriting belonged to Reamer. However, an FBI expert was not so confident, stating that handwriting analysis was, in fact, inconclusive and no definitive link to the missing Reamer could be made. Also in the vehicle was Reamer's winter coat, an item he would have been unlikely to leave behind. An autopsy revealed that Diana was stabbed 17 times and had a tube sock tied around her neck. Forensics would only be able to tell that the blood was human. Police suspected Reamer himself might have been involved in his girlfriend's death, with the relationship between the couple described as stormy by the press. Reamer was charged with domestic assault and malicious damage in October, and the two had only just reconciled. Robertson made the initial complaint, alleging her boyfriend had kicked in her apartment door and thrown her to the floor, rubbing her face into the carpet. There were visible marks on her nose and left eye, and there had been 2 previous complaints of domestic disturbances between the pair. A restraining order was in place, but the couple had ignored it to get back together. However, while this violence was undoubtedly shocking and criminal, it was classed as a misdemeanor and far from the violence seen in Robertson's killing. Despite this escalation, police believed he might have killed his girlfriend before leaving Crystal at the Kmart and fleeing. Considering the utilization of the tube sock, this also put him in the frame for the killing of Cooper and Harkins, despite no motive being apparent. Speaking to the press after his son initially went missing, Mike Reamer's father agreed that foul play might have been involved, adding that his son always carried a .22 caliber handgun when out checking his trap lines, saying, "You couldn't surprise him in the woods. If he was hurt in the woods, he could get out." The presence of a gun could be suggestive given that both Cooper and Harkins were shot with a .22. Yet, the weapon would undoubtedly have been utilized to kill Robertson in such a case, and such guns are common. Interestingly, bullet casings were found a short distance from the pickup truck, yet Robertson wasn't shot, suggesting that somebody opened fire for an unknown reason. Whether these were from a .22 was never made clear. With little more to go on, and their suspect seemingly having fled, police would have nothing new in the case for 22 years. On March 26, 2011, a hiker was in the woods near Mineral, around a mile from Diana Robertson, was found 25 years before. Spotting a discarded vacuum cleaner cover, the man curiously lifted it away to reveal the partial remains of a skull. The skull fragment was positively identified as belonging to Reamer, and a subsequent search revealed a jawbone, minus the teeth, alongside a pair of rubber boots that may or may not have been linked. No other remains were found, meaning that there was no chance of identifying a cause of death, which may have shed some light on the events of 1985. All a coroner could say was the skull hadn't suffered trauma such as a gunshot wound as what happened in Stephen Harkins' death. Whether the discovery of the skull eliminates Reamer as a suspect or not is open to debate. Found within a mile of Robertson, the corpse had seemingly gone unnoticed during searches at the time of the original killings. If the area was searched, this might suggest Reamer returned to the site and committed suicide, or the body had been well concealed. Equally, if the body was somehow overlooked, the possibility remains again that the murders were, in fact, a second double killing, and the actual killer walked away. While he was known to be violent toward Robertson, there seems to have been little indication Reamer was capable of 3 murders. If Diana's killing was pre-planned, it seems unlikely he would have carried out the killing in full view of his daughter, if he then planned to abandon her at Kmart 30 miles away. Plus, the vehicle contained clear blood on the passenger seat, and he would almost certainly have been covered in that blood, making any trip from the scene in the car immensely risky. The presence of a second vehicle seems more likely. Equally, it seems unlikely that Reamer would return to the location of the crime to commit suicide out of remorse and then walk a mile away from the girlfriend he had told he loved. If his grief at his actions was so immense, would he not wish to die alongside his beloved? There were also several coincidences in the case, with both men noted for their outdoor pursuits and both couples' relationships featuring a significant age gap of 15 years. Such a gap would be notable at any time, but featuring 2 killings by the same individual makes it seem even stranger. However, after Reamer's death, no more murders featured the signature tube sock, and both his knowledge of the area where he set traps and possession of a .22 caliber revolver cannot be ignored, nor can his history of violence. He was the only suspect if the earlier killings of Edward Smith and Kimberly Diane Lavin are discounted. In 1989, police solved the Smith and Lavin case when they positively linked the fingerprint found of their vehicle to a truck driver by the name of Billy Ray Ballard Jr. Ballard was arrested months after the killings for the abduction, torture, and rape of 2 women in Wyoming, his fingerprints finally proving a match. He immediately confessed to the murder of Smith and Lavin and pleaded guilty at his trial, being sentenced to a mandatory life sentence. He was undoubtedly at large during the time of both sets of murder in Washington, though there is no evidence he was in any way involved. No sock was found in the murders committed by Ballard, and given the composition of tube socks, decomposition is highly unlikely. However, in all 3 murders cases, the woman was found some distance away from the man, and in 2 cases, the skull of the victim was found separate from the body. However, this is not unusual due to predators carrying bones away. While never linked to other unsolved killings in Washington, Ballard's crime, another similar pair of killings took place in November 1987, around 100 miles away on the other side of Seattle. Jay Cook, 20, and Tanya Van Kallenberg, 18, traveled from Canada to purchase parts for Cook's father's business. Last seen boarding the ferry in Bremerton, Tanya's body would be found in a ditch near Alger on November 24. She'd been bound, raped, and shot in the head. Her wallet and keys were found thrown away at a Greyhound bus station. Police initially suspected Cook was responsible for the killing until his body was found nearly 60 miles away from where Tanya had been discovered. He was beaten and strangled. In 2018, new techniques allowed DNA collected in 1987 to be uploaded to GEDmatch. 2 cousins were found, and police soon arrested William Earl Talbot, a truck driver. Talbot was found guilty of the killings and is currently serving 2 life sentences at Washington State Penitentiary. In a letter to the court and reported by Seattle Weekly in 2019, Van Kallenberg's former best friend, Mae Robson, said, "The sorrow will remain in my heart for the rest of my life. I miss my friend Tanya. While it is little comfort, some peace will undoubtedly be felt that Talbot is finally behind bars." However, this is a peace that has been denied to the families of Ruth Cooper, Stephen Harkins, Diana Robertson, and possibly Mike Reamer. It is a near certainty that at least 3 of those individuals were killed by the same hand in the woods around Tacoma, possibly 4, maybe more. While Ballard admitted 2 of the killings, there is a possibility he may have been involved in more, and equally, Mike Reamer still seems to be the only suspect for the killing of his girlfriend. Yet, with significant questions unanswered, it is impossible to conclusively say that he was the culprit. While 35 years have passed since the brutal summer of 1985, the chances of new evidence being unearthed in the woods or anyone talking are dwindling. While some may rest easy believing the case was concluded all those years ago, somewhere an aging killer may be just waiting to take his deadly secrets to the grave.
Number 5.
Newell Sessions' buddy, Gabby, had left the trunk out in Sessions' shed and hadn't come back to claim it for 6 years. When Sessions finally got around to opening the old military box in 1992, what he found inside would spawn a Wyoming murder mystery that lasted until this year and finally peaked on the eve of Halloween. According to a release from the Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office, sometime back around 1960, an Iowa man shot and killed his brother, firing a .25 caliber handgun into the other's head. Packing his brother's body into an old military trunk and burying it, the brother unearthed the box sometime later and transported it to Wyoming. Nobody knows why. 32 years later, Newell Sessions busted an old, crusty padlock off a box in his shed. Things were about to get weird. When Sessions opened the box, he immediately called then Hot Springs County Sheriff John Lumley. Bones, a gunshot-shattered skull, a rotting cloth grocery bag. Something was afoot, although the skeleton was missing a hand. It didn't add up. After an X-ray detected a .25 caliber bullet embedded in the skull, Sheriff Lumley turned the remains over to the Wyoming Crime Lab on March 1, 1992. The lab determined the remains were from a white male 50s or 60s, around 5 foot 8 inches in height. A facial reconstruction was made based on the skull, giving the victim a face. Little else was known. Sheriff Lumley went to work contacting and interviewing Gabby, but dismissed him as a suspect, as the locker, padlock and items inside were dated from sometime between 1930 to 1950. Gabby claimed he had picked up the box at a sale either in Oklahoma or Wyoming, but never opened it because he didn't have the right tools. The Bones case remained cold in Hot Springs County for years, although a feature on Unsolved Mysteries sent the sheriff's office plenty of leads to chase. As time went on, technology changed, and Wyoming suddenly had the ability to test DNA. According to the Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office, a DNA sample obtained from an Iowa female, claiming to be the daughter of the deceased, made a positive match on October 19 of this year. The dead man was identified as Joseph Mulvaney, born 1923. His daughter's story was incredible. Mulvaney's daughter claimed her father was shot and killed by her uncle and buried in an old trunk. The uncle dug up the trunk when he decided to move and took it along to Wyoming, where he abandoned the trunk before moving to Mississippi and committing suicide, according to the Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office. There was no mention of the uncle's name in the official release from the Hot Springs officials, and no indication of whatever became of Newell Sessions' friend Gabby. The remains of Mulvaney have been returned to the family for burial. Requests for further information from the Mulvaney family, former Hot Springs County Sheriff John Lumley, and the Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office were not returned at press time.